All right, welcome everyone. I'm Lauren Mizock. I'm core faculty in the clinical psychology PhD program. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our qualitative dissertations faculty panel today. We'll have a range of faculty from across different programs at Fielding present on some special topics in research training and methodological innovations. I'm also the Ruthellen Josselson Qualitative Chair this year, and this is one of the last events I'm doing as part of that role. So I'm delighted to meet with you all today to have this special event. You have all received a flyer where you can see a list of the different faculty and topics that we will be addressing. The meeting will be recorded, and 4 of the faculty will be jumping in via Zoom. So it will be a hybrid panel. I will email to all who have registered on the Zoom registration link a copy of the recording if you would like to have that. Since we have so many great talks today and just an hour and a half together, each faculty will present and then we'll save questions and answers for the end. We have around 16 folks in the room, students in the clinical program who are taking this seminar for credit, and I can talk with all of you for any questions you might have about the course after the Q&A section of the seminar. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start with my presentation, which is, as a clinician, I can self-diagnose as a compulsion that I have to help students publish their dissertations. More positively, a passion. And I've been writing a chapter on a topic I've always wanted to write about, which is a practical guide to publishing over the course of 100 publications and 3 academic books. I've gotten really interested in the topic and have a few tips to share at the end. And this is something I put together as a chapter for a qualitative research handbook that we're doing for Fielding Graduate University Press. So keep an eye out for that. And other speakers on the panel today, most are making contributions to the book as well. And Patrick Sweeney in media psychology is going to be co-editing the book with me. So I've been looking at the literature on publishing and finding a lot of things that I think we kind of anecdotally find to be true. One is that publication rates are low, and there's a number of disparities that likely contribute to this. Some estimates suggest that quantitative and qualitative study research that has been completed has a publication rate of around 44%, although other estimates suggest that qualitative studies get published at an even lower rate. We see, for those of your clinical psychology doctoral students in the room, only about a quarter of those dissertations tend to be published in our field. When we look at some of our siblings in research-oriented psychology PhDs, they tend to publish a bit more than we do in terms of their dissertations than in the clinical and counseling applied fields. And also there's different cultural disparities that come up that we really need to overcome. Gender and racial ethnic disparities are clearly occurring in publishing, where one compelling statistic found that the gender rates of academics predicted the number of publications per year. So I want to motivate you all in thinking, why publish? We have these social justice implications around disparities in publishing qualitative research, cultural presence in the publishing world, as well as some qualitative bias. So what are editors and reviewers saying about why they're rejecting qualitative manuscripts? Well, it has a lot to do with some things that happen to quantitative manuscripts too. There may be issues with their perspective on the study quality or inadequate reporting of methods and results. So some of this data is giving us some clear guidelines on what we want to have in our manuscripts when we submit them to ensure success. Sometimes this happens right at the abstract, right? Think about editors and reviewers are doing maybe a very cursory look at the manuscript, and in the first page may decide, there's not enough detail. This doesn't look good. So one study suggests that if we have these 4 to 5 of these things, the acceptance rate goes up to 50%. So we want to make sure we're having detailed research questions, rationale, setting, sample, and procedure information. So these are some of the external barriers to consider around publishing qualitative research. But there's also a lot of ways in which, as researchers, we get in our own way. When looked at reasons that researchers cite for non-publication of qualitative research, they say, well, actually, most commonly, we still intend to publish the study, right? But it hasn't happened yet. Sometimes resource constraints may be coming up, like a lack of time or a job change, giving up after a paper was rejected by one or more journals, or the author is not even trying at all because they're having the feeling that the journal wouldn't publish the study. Many people I see often lack an intent to publish beyond a conference presentation or lose heart after a negative review or more. So as a clinician, I've been really thoughtful about the psychological experience of publishing. And I've noticed a few things in my observation of others and my work with students and peers, as well as in my own experience in publishing. And it requires a lot of management of a fear of rejection, right? So I think we can all guess as that being a key barrier to publishing. It doesn't feel good when you get that email in your inbox that says, we do not think the quality of your study will make a meaningful contribution to the literature after you put all that hard work into writing up a 30-page article. So of course, perfectionism can develop as an attempt to prevent rejection, I would argue. And I've seen perfectly good manuscripts, gather dust sometimes over 10 years as the author tries to make the document bulletproof. And instead, the manuscript's not getting out at all. So we can lose hope. This requires a lot of persistence and perseverance to keep submitting your manuscript to different journals. And I think, one thing that can come up is a lack of awareness of the process. So I see many people feel, oh, I got one rejection of the manuscript. It's probably not that good. So they give up. When I've often had to normalize for students that I work with that one rejection is nothing, and that's totally normal part of the process. I've also had a student take a manuscript out of a review process when they offered them a revise and resubmit, thinking that that was a bad thing or that it would be too much work. When I said, no, we got a bite. This is really good, and we want to keep going with it. So all this speaks to something that I think those of you who are doing dissertations in the room find is that there is a psycho-spiritual challenge of research. I really like the work of Stephen Pressfield, who's a novelist who wrote a book called The War of Art. So this is a fun flip on the classic title, The Art of War. And he has this theory that anytime you put a goal or a dream out into the universe, it's counterbalanced with this almost law of physics like property of resistance that develops in relationship to it. So he doesn't measure his productivity in writing in each day by how much he's written or the quality of the writing, but rather did he work through the inner resistance. So, for me, submitting another manuscript may not be achieving such a major psychospiritual challenge for me versus what I found in trying to start submitting for federal grants. And then I'm working through a lot more inner resistance and lack of awareness of fear I felt of just knowing how the submission portal worked. So we have to kind of navigate and anticipate some of that resistance. What are my tips for folks to walk away with? And I have a lot more information on this in the chapter. If you want a copy, feel free to email me. Of course, you want to select some good fit journals. Usually people are thinking of one. I like to make sure you've picked at least 3 right from the beginning and have a rank ordered list of where you're going to submit to. The second you get that rejection, you've got the next date lined up with another journal that you're going to submit to that, right? So there's a lot of this is kind of like the dating process. You want to keep hope alive, keep the manuscript alive. The rejection's not going to feel so bad if you've got that other date set up for next week, right? How do you assess the good fit nature of the journal? The 2 major things I want to look for in qualitative pubs are the competitiveness of the journal, and then I want to go on the journal website and search the journal for qualitative content to make sure, there still has been a historical bias against qualitative research. Even this summer, I had a manuscript rejected where the journal said, we don't take qualitative research, which is very out of date. And, some cases you could even get trouble with APA for this because Ruthellen Josselson has developed some qualitative guidelines to help journals figure out how to review this publications who are new to it. So luckily things are turning a corner and qualitative is a lot more accepted in the research world. So it's a good time to submit a manuscript. I'm also looking for the competitiveness of the journal. I got one rejection from a manuscript this summer where they said, we have 800 submissions a year. Okay, this is way too competitive of a journal. I will Google for the APA journal rejection rates if I want to submit to like the gold standard level of an APA psychology journal. And they publish their data every year what their rejection and acceptance rate is for manuscripts. And so if I see a journal that says they have an 88% rejection rate, well, I'm going to go with a journal in my topic area that has a 40% rejection rate, right? So these are good strategies to keep in mind. So here's a controversial piece of advice. I recommend submitting, after each rejection, I wouldn't make major revisions on the manuscript until you've been rejected by 3 journals. Now, this goes against intuition, which is, the feedback from each group of reviewers who've rejected the manuscript. Well, if I integrate all of that, that will help make the manuscript stronger for the next journal. Definitely, but it could take you several days to several weeks to integrate all the feedback from a set of reviewers who rejected the piece and don't want to work with it. So instead, I recommend, which I learned this from a really well-published academic, to submit to 3 good fit journals before you go on to making major revisions. If they caught a few typos or something like that, that's fine to change, but things get really slowed down and the resistance will build in keeping the manuscript alive if you spend a lot of time integrating feedback from people who don't want to work with the manuscript. My rule of thumb also to keep the hope alive, keep the manuscript alive, overcome the rejection issues, is to resubmit a manuscript. I like to resubmit it within 24 hours, but not everyone has that compulsion as I do to publish. A more realistic time frame might be a week, because after that, the manuscript will just gain a lot of heaviness and weight and will slow down. It will be harder to keep it under review. Once you spend 15 minutes submitting it somewhere else, you can move on to the next thing and, not be worried about it. Something I noticed as I was researching for this chapter and presentation is that a thing that has worked for me a lot lately, and that was suggested to me by an APA journal editor who wanted me to do this, is when I had a manuscript that was rejected, he said, why don't you integrate these revisions and submit it as a new manuscript to the journal? So I will now ask editors and say, I know this doesn't guarantee publication, but would you be open to me resubmitting the manuscript as a new submission after integrating revisions from your reviewers? And they often like this because they've already spent a lot of time and energy on your manuscript, and they still get to add to their rejection rate, which makes the journal look more competitive, but save some of the energy they've already put into your piece if they think it's could be potentially improved for publication. If you are running out of steam, then it's a good opportunity to find a co-author who can pick up your manuscript. And we do this a lot in our research lab at Fielding, where we'll assign somebody else, once you're done with your dissertation, like you want to be done, right? So sometimes we will pair students with others who are new to the project, who have a lot of new energy. You've got a pretty good product to offer that they can carry through the lengthy process of the revisions and resubmissions. And you can also serve in that role to add to your CV. Using the publication format, if your program allows, which more and more are, is a really easy way to save some time in reformatting your data to publication format. So definitely try to advocate for that with your dissertations. I want to leave you on a positive note. which is something I've observed and the literature also suggests that dissertations make great publications. If you think about it, right, you have a committee of 3 or more experts in your content area and methodology who have reviewed the manuscript at least 3 rounds by the time of the final document. So that's over 9 edits that the document has gone through. That's way more oversight that I have on my research as a more experienced researcher. So I found when I help students publish their dissertations, it's sometimes a lot easier to publish than some of my own new work. And the research suggests that once published, dissertations tend to make it into really good journals and are cited repeatedly. I do want to add a caveat though, which is it's a long-term process. So this is another thing to be aware. Sometimes students will say to me, did the publication come out yet? And I'm like, oh, it's only been a year. It takes 3 to 4 years for dissertations in particular, to go from, the draft form to official pagination in a journal. So there's a lot of patience and need for follow through, but once it's under review, you can kind of move on to the next thing. So again, I want to encourage you all to think about publishing. I'm happy to consult with any manuscripts you might have. Feel free to email me. It's something I've been doing as part of our publication group this year, my qualitative chair role that's now come to an end, but I'm happy to continue to consult. Or if you'd like a copy of the chapter slides or references, you can email me for those as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Lauren, that talk was so wonderful. Now I'm all abuzz thinking about your ideas. So let me hold on. This forwarded. Sorry, technical difficulties. So let me start at the beginning with my talk. I'm Karen Shackelford, and I'm a faculty member in the media psychology program. And today I'm going to talk about qualitative research as one type of research that you're learning in addition to quantitative research, and some research instincts that you may be carrying over from the quantitative research training that you have, and trying to address some questions that I've received frequently as a dissertation chair. So I got my PhD in 1997 in social psychology, and I've been doing teaching ever since, and teaching for 15 years at Fielding. I've chaired quite a lot of dissertations. I'm also the editor of an APA journal, The Psychology of Popular Media. And so I read, I see every manuscript that comes into the journal. And in that role, for instance, I know that in my field anyway, it is quantitative papers far outweigh the qualitative papers. Patrick, who is on our panel tonight, is actually my qualitative expert on psychology of popular media. He's an associate editor. And I know that it's hard for him to sometimes get reviewers because a lot of people will say, I don't have the expertise in qualitative to review that. So that's something that becomes a snafu behind the scenes. But if you could think about it, growing up, even as a kid, remember our science textbooks in school where we, did little experiments where we planted seeds maybe, and we looked at the data from the outcomes. We've been learning about the scientific method in quantitative, all of our educational lives. And so those things have become somewhat instinctual, especially if you've majored in psychology or another social science. Now you're in graduate school. And so this talk is geared towards people who are considering choosing a qualitative dissertation, but it can also, I think, hopefully have some tips for folks who are going through the process. I have chaired a number of qualitative dissertations and published some qualitative data, but just FYI, I am not, everyone else in this panel is a lovely expert in that. I was trained 100% as a quantitative researcher, and I do really love qualitative, but I see when I look at it how much I don't know, because my point here is that quantitative research methods and qualitative research methods are all um, a giant expertise that you're developing. And in grad school at Fielding, I know in the media psych program, I believe in the clinical program as well, and other programs, um, we're training you both in qualitative and quantitative. And I just want you to think about this and maybe give yourself some slack. That's a huge task. Like in my grad school, I only had to learn quantitative methods and quantitative data analysis. And believe me, that was enough to make me wake up in the night in sweats. So how are you going to master both of those perhaps and also develop the depth of expertise in qualitative? It's a lot. I just putting that out there. That doesn't mean I don't think you should pursue it. It's just that it's a lot. So I have had some aha moments with some of my graduate students as working with them on their dissertation, that I think sometimes because those quantitative instincts go back farther in time in our education, perhaps, we inadvertently apply them when we're going to, we know we're going to design a qualitative dissertation, but then we think, oh, I know I need to do this or I need to do that because we have those quantitative uh, instincts in mind. So another thing is, I think that quantitative and qualitative can sometimes have very opposing instincts, and it's very easy to get confused by those. Let's face it, everyone's confused during their dissertation process. Everyone is nervous and everything else. So trying to do something that fewer people know about, that can be more of a challenge. It depends on your context and your own personal experience. It's not the same for everyone. But I developed some frequently asked questions based on my experience with my dissertation students and in other contexts. So if you're developing a qualitative dissertation or other research study, you might say, okay, what's my method? And we like to start people with what's the question you want to answer? So if the question I want to answer is about people's rich lived experience, I probably want to do a qualitative study. If I'm going to try to make a statement about causality or prediction, I might want to do an experiment. The question itself is the thing that decides the method. So in a quantitative study, of course, you're going to select the design, and that has its own pitfalls. And you're going to use statistical methods. You're going to open up SPSS and analyze your data, run an ANOVA or a regression. So let's say you choose an experiment, you collect the data, you analyze the data, and you have a hypothesis before the fact here. So what about for qualitative? I really believe that sometimes the quantitative instinct kicks in and students will say, I need to predict what my participants are going to say, because it's such a gut reaction to say, if I'm going to do this study, I need to know what they're going to say. Again, I'm not the world's greatest qualitative expert. I'm an enthusiast and I've done it, but I think that you are trying to open yourself up to whatever they say, and you don't need to necessarily predict what they're going to say. So in qualitative, you do select a method, but actually you're kind of selecting two things, with a little caveat here. So you need to select what you're going to do to write your introductory questions. I've done some of Ruthellen's narrative inquiry and writing interview questions from that. And her language is the big Q and the little q's. And so you have those questions that you're trying to point your participants in the direction of, and then you're interviewing them. But then there's also another method that you need to analyze the data. So a lot of times when I'm talking to students, especially maybe earlier in the program, they name one method that they're going to do, and maybe they will use the same method as possible for both of those things. But probably you want to keep in mind that you're going to be saying two different methods. Like you may be using narrative inquiry to write the interview questions and identify your big Qs and little q's, but you may be using thematic analysis to analyze your data. So that's something that would show up on one of the best practices guidelines like Ruthellen wrote that Lauren mentioned. In research, you kind of have to understand who you are as the researcher. What is your role? So in quantitative research, we are testing hypotheses. I can remember teaching intro psych and saying in research, you're trying to describe, predict, explain, or control something that is happening. And you're going to be analyzing numerical data. Sometimes you have open-ended items, but quantitative people tend to quantify those in some ways as well. But in qualitative, you're not hypothesis testing and you're not trying to demonstrate that you predicted the finding and it came out in support of what you predicted. What you are there is, if you're an experimenter in the quant side, you're an interpreter in the qualitative side. You're interpreting a text. And honestly, people use fancy words all the time. They use things like post-positivist and hermeneutic and all that kind of stuff. And then you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to quit graduate school and do something else. That's what I would say. So you're trying to describe. And people ask me all the time in qualitative studies, do I need multiple coders? That's a gut instinct from a quantitative person that you need multiple coders because what you're trying to do is get definitions for things. Let's say you're doing a content analysis, and let's say you had two coders, you give them a definition. Once I did a content analysis about the way women are portrayed in video games. And so there were images, and one of the definitions was scantily clad. So we had to describe what does that mean, or aggressive included carrying a weapon, using a weapon, hitting someone. And so what you want is for both of those people to apply that identically and just sort of the AI could do it kind of thing. In qualitative, you don't use a coder and you're the interpreter, and so you're you're there's different ways to go about saying how did you name your positionality, understand your perspective and biases, and there are other ways to deal with the idea behind why we would have multiple coders in quant, like someone else can help me check, like a critical friend, looking at my analysis and giving me feedback on it. You can kind of verify what you did by keeping a data trail. There's other methods, but you're not trying to demonstrate that you have just supported a hypothesis in the way that you do in quantitative. So I want to kind of leave you with the concept that again, it's so much like when you write any research study, getting an introduction that does justice, presenting the problem, making it intriguing, backing it up with science. Um, and so it's really, really understandable that those different things that you have learned, if you're learning quant and qual at the same time, might start to add to your confusion. Like I say, everyone's confused in their dissertation at some point because of the incredible complexity of it and the things that Lauren was talking about perfectionism and not wanting to mess up and all of that, and imposter syndrome and the whole stuff that we all experience. Um, so one thing I would say to look out for based on my experience with grad students is try not to go into your intro predicting what your participants are going to say. Try to understand that it's okay. Don't do that even though your friend who's doing a quantitative dissertation is doing that. You want to just be open to what they're saying and to try to look at it in a relatively unbiased way. And you don't need to write the introduction around the prediction. Like I believe that when people listen to this sort of music, what they'll tell me is it transformed their lives, or or whatever it may be. You just have to open up to what they tell you. And I do think one of the joys of qualitative research is that you do not know what they're going to say, and you don't have to fit it into a box. Thinking of this for when you're teaching, maybe be teaching methods or coaching students. I'd like to see us teach those qualitative and quantitative distinctions throughout the process, to just keep in mind it would be like this if you did this, but it would be like this if you did the other. Integrate those into methods classes to help students build instincts. And these are just, I was thinking these provocative questions as I was writing this, so I thought I'd share them with you. I wonder, is it too much to ask a graduate student to become a deep expert in both qualitative and quantitative methods? Are we doing that at Fielding? If we don't, then what's the alternative? Because they're both incredibly important. So maybe if you have any insights into this, I'd love to hear them later. But that's all I have for you tonight. I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was wonderful. A great introduction to our topic. Turn it over to Amy.
Thank you.
Can everyone see that on Zoom? I got a share screen.
We're not seeing Amy's slides.
Sorry, one moment. I gotta click share screen.
Looks good.
Lauren, I just hit this to advance, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Fisher-Smith. I'm a faculty member in the clinical psych program, and I'm going to talk to you extremely briefly about navigating reflexivity with the qualitative research process. Let's see. All right. What exactly is researcher reflexivity? Some of you might be kind of familiar with this term. I think it's been around for a long time. Even though this term has been around for a long time and some of you may be kind of familiar with it, there are several scholars anyway that feel like because there have been so many definitions kind of floating around regarding reflexivity that this has kind of led to some confusion about what we mean by reflexivity, what reflexivity is, and how to manage it. And maybe because there's this confusion and maybe lack of understanding about reflexivity, this means that reflexivity is maybe rarely or even poorly addressed in qualitative research, and certainly potentially poorly addressed in even qualitative publications. But the good news, I think, is that reflexivity is actually a really essential aspect of qualitative research. We ought to be really clear about what it is. It impacts almost every aspect of the research process. And we really ought to capitalize on reflexivity. We ought to be leveraging it because it really helps us become better qualitative researchers. So what the heck is it? Oh, it's making my slide kind of wonky. I don't like that. I'm going to give you a definition here, just kind of briefly from Almost Vega and their colleagues. They kind of scanned the literature over the last 25 years and sort of integrated a definition here of researcher reflexivity as a set of continuous, collaborative, and multifaceted practices through which researchers self-consciously critique, appraise, and evaluate how their subjectivity and I guess context influence the research process. I can't decide if that's supposed to be there or not, but we'll go with it. Part of what this definition kind of highlights for me is this kind of fits with the previous presentation, highlights how the different philosophical assumptions driving qualitative and quantitative methods. Reflexivity really emphasizes researcher subjectivity. I mean, we could sort of define that a little bit, but I'll just leave it alone. Whereas quantitative research really seeks to, I think, eliminate researcher subjectivity, right? And bias. It's essentially trying to kind of control variables, eliminate error variance, trying to isolate the relationship, at least in certain research designs, trying to isolate the relationship between the IV and the DV and trying to kind of understand efficient causal relationships between those variables. We aren't looking for those kinds of linear relationships in qualitative research. We're typically looking to understand experience. We're typically looking to understand lived experience or some kind of phenomenon. And reflexivity, I think, highlights the relationship between the researcher's subjectivity and the research phenomenon. What's the relationship between those two things? I'm going to skip this. Walsh identified way back in 2003, identified 4 overlapping and interacting dimensions of reflexive processes. This included the personal, the interpersonal, the methodological, and the contextual. My guess is that you're very kind of familiar maybe with personal reflexivity. This is kind of talking about or focusing on the researcher's personal reflexivity. So thinking about the researcher's personal expectations, assumptions, conscious and unconscious reactions to context, participants, data, how the researcher's experience and motivations might even influence how they, their own interpretive stance towards the data. But there are other kinds of reflexivity, interpersonal reflexivity, referring to how the relationships surrounding the research process influence the context of the research situation, the people involved. That's most often the researcher and the research participants. I'm going to skip over and look at contextual reflexivity. Focusing on how your particular research project, how that's located within its own cultural and historical context, sort of how is the research question embedded in and influenced by social and cultural and systemic practices, whether those are implicit and or explicit. Really what I want to focus on in my last few minutes is methodological reflexivity, in part because I find that this is a blind spot for students, at least the students that I'm interacting with the most. And this refers to how researchers critically consider methodological decisions. In other words, what is your methodological and philosophical approach? What are the grounding philosophical assumptions of your method? And how do these philosophical assumptions of your method impact your own interpretive stance towards the data? So it's not enough, I hate to break it to you, it's not enough just to know the method and the procedures and steps of your method. So I guess I am saying yes to the person who just presented before me. Yeah, if you're going to be a qualitative researcher, you need to be a little bit of an expert if you're going to do a dissertation. Sorry. And it also means that you need to not only know the steps of your method, the procedures of your method. I'm going to suggest that it also means that you need to become familiar with the philosophical assumptions, the epistemology, the ontology of your methodology. So it does require a little bit more. I'll give you a quick example in the 2 minutes that I have left to speak. A lot of times in my research, I rely a lot on reflexive thematic analysis. That's Braun and Clark. I'm not going to belabor their actual procedural methodology. It's using a lot of coding and theme analysis, and they conceptualize theme in terms of looking for patterns in narrative data. You can see this is their quotes here. Theme is something that captures important elements about the data in relation to the research question, something that represents a level of patterned response or meaning within the data. But I like this about Braun and Clark because they say, prior to the methodological procedures, the steps of reflexive TA, the researcher has to answer some other important and additional questions. Will the data analysis be inductive and bottom up? Or are you going to conduct the analysis top down and more sort of, will it be theoretically driven? Even more importantly for me, what are the researchers' epistemological commitments? Braun and Clark mention realist essentialist epistemology. They mention constructivist positions, but these are not the only ones. I love this quote. They say the research epistemology guides what you can say about your data and informs how you theorize meaning. So in other words, your epistemological commitments delimit what you can say about your data. I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, so what are my, I'll go ahead and just put it all out there on the table. What are my, okay, I can't see if I don't have these, sorry. What are my epistemological commitments? I'll tell you, do I have like 30 seconds? Okay, my epistemological commitments tend to be existential, broadly existential, phenomenological, and hermeneutic. What does that mean? I'm just gonna give you a teeny little piece of this. For instance, it means that I tend to see people as having intentionalities that drive their behavior. It means that I tend to see people as making choices in light of their circumstances. I'm very moved by Heidegger's idea that we're thrown possibility and his notions about facticity. That's just a fancy way to say that we're thrown into circumstances that are quite beyond our control. And yet, even though we find ourselves in these factical circumstances, we still have possibility. We still have, we're still capable of making agentic choices, even though we're in these circumstances that are constrained. And there's more that I could say here, but I don't have time. And if you have access to the slides, what's cool about this is that one of my co-authors would say that something like facticity, which is an epistemological assumption that I bring to my analysis, it's something that I bring to the methodological procedures of TA, it's an ace up my sleeve. It's something that I bring to my own interpretive frame of reference that opens up the data. That's how you leverage your analysis. That's what I mean when I say that we ought to be making reflexivity something that we're leveraging. It makes us better researchers. Okay, and how do we really do it? I wish I had time to show you, but I don't because I'm now out of time. But this is a recent publication in the Journal of Positive Psychology, where a colleague and I are looking at resilience, and we're actually using facticity, right, as a way to open up the data and showing how people who are people who experience genocide, right? Who are capable of resilience even in extremity, in these extreme circumstances, are resilient. But in terms of methodology, I think it was really important for me personally that I was able to sort of open up the data in this particular way, given my own epistemological commitments. That's all I got. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll turn it over to Melissa, right? Thank you, Amy. That was a terrific talk and picked up on some things we were talking about in our qualitative seminar today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Rivera, and I am associate faculty in the EDD Leadership for Change program. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about participatory action research. I've been doing PAR work for about 30 years, and I've been a coach for almost 20, and I thought that kind of naturally mapped itself onto Fielding's motto, change the world, start with yours. My work has been rooted in critical PAR, which my dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Michelle Fine and Dr. Maria Torre, suggest is a modest move to democratize and decolonize research. Some of the elements of critical PAR include an examination of power and injustice, a dedication to no research on us without us, which I'll speak about in a moment, a series of actions from traditional scholarship and social policy to public art and local organizing, all coming, emerging from and using systemic inquiry for the sake of democratic knowledge production. Some of the roots of PAR include action research in the tradition of Kurt Lewin, social movements in the Southern traditions of Paulo Freire and others in Latin America, critical theory in the tradition of liberation scholars such as Ansaldúa, Hooks, and Smith. And if you dip your toe into the PAR literature, you may discover that instead of how-to steps, what you might see are principles and commitments instead, a way that the group approaches the work together, like these listed here, which were developed by the group at the Public Science Project at the City University of New York. And that is indeed what my colleagues and I did when we co-created Par Entre Mundos. We have a set of 8 guiding principles, and I'm going to speak about 2, participation and creative praxis. So participation is no research on us without us. That means if you consider your dissertation research question and imagine who are the people that are influenced or who influence the findings or what those findings could become and are impacted by those findings. In PAR projects, usually they are integrated into the entire developmental arc of the research process, meaning co-defining the research question, considering what the theoretical framework might be, and also participating in data collection, analyses, interpretation, and dissemination. So participation looks like building research from a collective we, holding tensions from entangled us, surfacing power dynamics, engaging intersectional dialogues, and inviting subjectivities and complexities, meaning we address, invite, embrace, and tussle with hard things. And creative praxis are methods for collecting and presenting data, those that are embedded in cultural and creative productions of community. And that could look like maps, problem trees, photo voice, graffiti walls, among others. And I'm going to speak about a few. I thought that it would be helpful potentially to see how these two principles live in action, in practice, in three PAR projects that I have been fortunate to be part of. The first is the National Latino Education Research and Policy Project, which was an initiative to transform education for Latinx communities. And we had a series of focus group style gatherings across different regions in the United States. And when we gathered folks around this issue, we thought, how can we bring together as many stakeholders with diverse perspectives, experiences, knowledge bases into the conversation? So that included university researchers and school administrators, teachers, parents, social workers, counselors, students, policymakers, folks from nonprofit organizations, and local artists and organizers. And they were all around the table discussing it because we wanted that richness of participation. Along the way, what emerged from all those regional gatherings was a national board, which was representative of the different regions and the different backgrounds. And you might find in most PAR projects, there is some kind of research committee or advisory council, or in our case, a national board. And once we established the agenda and framework collectively and co-edited the volume, which is the image on top, we started doing projects. And one of the projects was infusing participatory action research as pedagogy in teacher education. And so in one of our training sessions, we had teachers write their educational journeys, including the highlights and some of the challenges they experienced. They did a visual map of it, and then they gathered in small groups to discuss them. They discussed the challenges that they experienced, and then across the group, and then that their students also experienced in the classrooms, and they created problem trees. The issues were put into the trunk, the roots of the problem were identified and articulated, and the expression of those issues were mapped as branches and leaves, which is the image below. So that's how creative praxis was included into this PAR process. Project number 2 is Changing Minds, which was a PAR study on the impact of college in a maximum security women's prison. And in most PAR projects, the issue of insider-outsider is addressed and wrestled with, because we are simultaneously participants with all of our subjectivities, and also researchers with some level of objectivity in the scientific method. So we are both and at all times. And that there was an extra layer to that, as one can imagine, within the prison system. So there was a culture, language, and ways of being on the inside that inmates shared that those leaving the prison could not, and didn't have those same experiences. And so a research methods class was developed, and qualitative research methods was taught to inmates so that they could be co-researchers, participating in throughout the entire development of the project, from the questions to the theories to the data collection, analysis, interpretation, and dissemination processes. And an inmate committee then emerged from that class to do just that. And finally, the third project is at Puente, which was a community-based organization, which through a very innovative process also created a New York City public high school. And they infused the arts into their curricula and anecdotally understood that it worked and wanted some data around it. So we did a PAR project, and we started with a study group. So we brought in the literature, and we developed a research committee from that study group that was representative with stakeholders across the institution. And so in that process, there were students who were part of that research committee. And then when word got out, their peers were interested in participating. So a YPAR project was also incorporated, that meaning youth participatory action research. And The young people developed a research question and protocols such as interviews and narrative data, and also photo voice image-based data for their project, which became a thread in the larger endeavor. So as many voices in the institution and the community as possible were invited to engage this inquiry process. And given that they were looking at the impact of art on learning, we thought creative praxis was essential. So the bottom image shows what we did before every interview. There were laid out a ton of arts materials, and people were asked an open-ended questions such as, what's your experience been like in this institution? Can you please create some kind of illustration that sort of depicts that? And so they did collages. I mean, this is one image, but there were collages and 3D sort of mini installations. And it was really beautiful to see that a different form of, instead of just narrative, the way that they involved this creative process and became a beautiful catalyst for the interview process. So I encourage you, I think you may have received this document as part of the readings, which was developed and created by folks at the Public Science Project, which offer a series of commitments and questions to consider if you're thinking about using participatory action research in your dissertations. So in summary, I just want to encourage everybody to look at your research question, the one that you're deeply passionate about, and the one that if you have a desire to improve, change, or transform an issue or a community, to contemplate and reflect on how many different stakeholders, how many different people influence and can be influenced by or impacted by the findings of your study, and ways that you might integrate them throughout or in different ways beyond just interview ease. And also for creative practices, in addition to narrative data, what are some other creative ways that you can bring some data in so that you have a more kaleidoscopic understanding of what is happening around the issue you're trying to learn about, right, and address. Thank you very much for your time. I'm always happy to speak about PARS, so please stay connected.
Thank you, Melissa. That's a really exciting topic. I know students got excited hearing about it. Turning it over to Annabelle.
Hi, everybody. So qualitative research is about lived lives in context. So you guys are living in context right now and sitting through a lot of information. So I want everybody in your context to stand up. Stand up, roll your arms around, and take a breath. So this is some heady stuff, right? And you're seeing so many dimensions of qualitative research. I want to first thank Lauren Mizock, who's the Ruthellen Josselson Chair of Qualitative Research. I think at Fielding, not just in the School of Psychology. And Ruthellen Josselson, of course, is a heroine of qualitative research. And she's forged new frontiers for all of us for the credibility of qualitative research. And also, Lauren, I was a FRS at Clinical Psych for a number of years, of faculty research specialist, that's what it was called. So I was on a bunch of committees over there, I think for about 9 years. I've been at Fielding 29 years. I'm a faculty in the School of Leadership Studies and specifically in human organization development. And Lauren is just an amazing chair, and she gets her students' articles published. So I appreciate also she's created this panel for us to talk about qualitative research. And I know it's getting late, at least on the East Coast. I know Karen's on the East Coast. and maybe other people. I'm in Rocky Mountain, so I'm on Mountain Daylight. And some of you, I know there's a big group in Anaheim. I wish I was there with you, but I'll try to keep within my 10 minutes and I'll start my timer. So this is something completely different. But first off, I want to give a bow to Lauren. I try to get my students publishing their dissertations, and it is a challenge and it takes perseverance. But one of my students, we just published, we were turned down 3 times, but the last time they gave us really specific feedback. And so we were able to incorporate that, and we just got notice last week it was published. And then I want to give a bow to Karen to think about the differences in quantitative and qualitative. I think, no, we don't want you. It's not possible to create experts in both, but I think we can help students be competent consumers of both. And then we can help them going on to, I think it was Amy's talk. What are their epistemological positionality? Those are 2 really big words. But they can, in HOD, I try to get students to be able to consume quantitative work and put them on that road if they want to do that, but also consume qualitative work, because we're all still looking at validity and reliability, but they're different. They're different epistemological worlds, right? And then I want to take a bow to Amy's talking about reflexivity, so important. And she pointed out the researchers' methodological, I might say epistemological stance is so important. And then we went on to hear, I'm sorry if I got the name wrong, Melissa, yes. And her positionality is that really in the critical theory issue, that we can't just study people in isolation, as sometimes psychologists do. When I was a freshman at University of Michigan, they put me in a room in research studies to do various problems. So we're not doing that really, but there are many critical theory approaches now. Okay, and actually I'm in 2 minutes already. My little talk is, if you are coding qualitative data, either in an interview or in an open-ended written response, how do you code to then move to themes that actually are resonant? So this is part of qualitative research, is that we're subjective epistemologically. We think we co-construct data with our participants. But we're not biased, quote unquote. We want to be in the world with our participants. But how do you do those codes? So it's a little different. It's a little kind of a technical approach to how you move from codes to themes. Okay, so I subscribe to open coding, which comes out of grounded theory, and also mainly constructivist grounded theory, which Lauren, I believe, still positions herself in. I position myself into narrative research, which is we want to hear voices of people who haven't been heard. So we know there's a lot of different genres in qualitative: ethnography, autoethnography, case studies, phenomenology, heuristics. I'm sure I've missed some of them. But I position myself in narrative. And in narrative, we really want to, it comes out of the feminists and then the Black feminist movement, that we want to hear voices of people whose voices haven't been heard. And it does overlap in critical theory. We're not assuming that we're studying an individual in isolation. We're assuming this individual lives in a society where there's certain forces, certain societal forces that keep their voices from being heard. So it does have a little bit of a critical theory tinge, I guess. Okay, so this is some themes. So I'm just going to talk about how you get themes that really resonate in authenticity with your participants' voices. So this is an article And this guy was looking at coping with major events and the role of spirituality. So you guys can look at these themes. Now, the one thing about qualitative research, if you read themes that the researcher could have created without doing the research, you just go, is this really research? So I think some of these we'd probably figure out without his work on the research. But one of these, I think, is resonant. Resonant to me means that it really gives you an authentic feeling of what the participants said. So he said modes of coping, avoidance, and acceptance. So that has resonance to me because coping isn't always positive, you know. Sometimes if you're avoiding, is that good coping? But that's an example of themes you might see in research. Now I want to show you these themes from one of our grads. She was in clinical, Keisha Cameron. And here's a theme: preparation for bias. Don't forget you're the Black girl. Racial identity, you still have to have street cred. And this one always gets me. Racial pride. My ancestors delivered babies in the cotton field. So I kind of like it when people actually capture a few words from their participants, because if she just had racial pride as her theme, yeah, that is a message. You see the topic of the dissertation again. Black women in response to racial socialization achievement message. Yeah, racial pride. But adding my ancestors delivered babies. So I often do a class with students about coding to move to themes. And I have them write a little piece about an event in their fielding journey that stands out for them. And then I use this bracketing technique after they get the data before they code. So they're trying to make their assumptions conscious, so they can be aware of them. So as I said earlier, in qualitative research, we accept subjectivity as part of our epistemology. And so the idea is you're still a person, you're still a whole person, but you are the instrument of analyzing data. So if you can bring your awareness to that, it's not like you're taking yourself away. The reflexivity piece is so important. You as a researcher will probably be changed by your research as well. But so I have students bracket what they think, and this is how we code. It's messy. So as you can see, I teach students to look for salient units. Saliency is meaning. And I use it inductively. I think Karen was talking about a code book, and maybe Amy as well. So there's a priori coding, where you have a theory or you have a theoretical framework or you have someone else's research that did code. So you have a code book that you code about. But I really like students to do inductive coding, so they're really listening to their students' words. Okay, I'm at 8 minutes. So anyway, it's messy, but this is where the magic happens. How do you organize your codes so you can read what they say and come up with a theme? So this is just creating an Excel sheet, so we have a bunch of codes: emotions positive, emotions anxiety, emotions irritated. And I grouped those under emotions. And then I read their quotes. And then I came up with the theme: the feeling experience is exciting, but includes the range of emotions. And I added some students' word. I couldn't be more excited. I was plagued. And you can see the other one, being part of a group. There were a lot of codes under that. And look at their quotes. So you're getting resonance with what they say. Now, this is a student who's doing a pilot study for a dissertation, and she's interested in Latinos who flourish after childhood trauma. So she doesn't have a lot of quotes here: belonging and otherness. But she's put the quotes, the salient units, next to that code. And then she's kind of jamming on, well, what would a theme be like? So this one, early childhood experiences leading to mistrust in the education system. I think that theme has resonance. Here's another example of a student, Shatoya Hayes, working on her pilot study to move towards her dissertation. She's interested in the microaggressions that Black medical students experience. So she has these codes in the second column over, psychological impact. She's grouped them under imposter syndrome, isolation, emotional stress, stereotyping. And she has what they said. And then she starts working on psychological impact or racial profiling or coping mechanisms. What I would like her to do next is go back to read these quotes again and try to add what I would call directionality. So what about psychological impact? And what about racial profiling? So I just finished a study on, let's see, how am I doing? I'm at 10 minutes, almost 11. I'll be done shortly. So you could also code with qualitative software. I think Lauren, well, when I used to work with her, she used NVivo, I used Deduce. And so you have these narratives, and then you start making codes. You can see the codes. So I was working on archetypal identification to release reactive emotional trauma. You can say I'm a psychologist as well as some of the other people on here. And so we have these codes that I'm working on. The cool thing about a qualitative software is instead of having to make that Excel sheet, I can sort the codes by, I can sort what they call and deduce excerpts by the codes. So these two, I mean, this is just through a bunch more, but I was looking at the code archetype story interactions. So they visualized the archetype, they visualized the scene that was difficult, and then they brought the archetype into that scene. And as you can see, there was, from the quotes, the excerpts, a lot happened. So we have, but the imagery of the forest and stream remind me of the memory of the trauma will never go, but neither will the memory of the peace and deeper understanding of the mysteries of life. So the code, I mean, there were a lot more excerpts, but the theme was participants created a symbolic narrative of transformation. So yeah, so this is the coding approach. I teach my students to read again. And Ruthellen used to talk about a hermeneutic. And I don't mean to speak for her, but what I understood by that is you're going to deeper and deeper meaning, like we call a hermeneutic cycle. So you read and you read again. And then you bracket what you think you're going to get, so you can at least be aware of it. It's not like you're going to be objective. And you code excerpts, then you collate codes, and then you look at those to come up with themes. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Annabelle. So helpful. There's so little out there on how to go from coding to themes. So we'll turn it over to Patrick for our last talk. And thank you,
Okay.
Annabelle, for drawing us together.
Great. That was great, Annabelle. Thank you. I loved seeing the process of the coding to the themes. That's always, I think, so useful to see. And thank you, Lauren, and for organizing this and everyone else who's presented. You can all see my title slide. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Dr. Patrick Sweeney, faculty in the Media Psychology program here at Fielding. And I am on the East Coast, so if I seem a little tired, it's because I am. And I'll try to be quick. So I'll be talking today about analyzing media data. I think it's increasingly, especially with social media, students are using sources of media as the data in their dissertations or in studies. And so I have here this very rough image that I've kind of created of two different kinds of spectra of where you could place different methods that have to do with media on these different axes. So on the one end, on the top, we have methods that are just kind of observing or describing what's there. And on the other end, manipulating, participating approaches that, whether it's a quantitative experiment where they're creating the situation and producing the data, or if it's an approach like ethnography, or as Dr. Rivera talked about, participatory action research, where you're engaging with the object of study. Your presence as a researcher is impacting the research data more. And on the other axis there, quantitative on one end, qual on the other. Today, I'll be focusing on these approaches on the right, kind of ranging from ways of analyzing data that stay closer to the surface, more the manifest content of the data, things like content analysis, or moving more toward thematic analysis, of which there are, of course, many varieties. Amy Fisher-Smith spoke about reflexive thematic analysis, which is one particular approach from Brown and Clark. And of course, all of these could be divided up further, but I think it's a useful kind of just rubric to kind of lay out this larger landscape of different approaches. And I will be taking, in this presentation, a very kind of high-level view of using media in research and qualitative research. So I won't be getting into epistemology and ontology, though if you are really missing that, you can sign up for my qualitative research methods class next time I teach it. So the first, question, why analyze media, right? So qualitative researchers, historically, we've relied often a lot more on things like interviews or focus groups. But I think there are a lot of reasons why we might want to look at media as social scientists, as psychologists. I would argue that media both shapes and reflects human subjectivity. So it's a record of human experiences. It's a place where we can see what's been happening, or at least what has been written about, or films made about, or so on, of human experience. And at the same time, we also know from social psychology that it influences people. It has an impact on people's behavior, their attitudes, their cognitions. And as the philosopher Ian Hacking argues, say, for example, concepts in media about, and we see this, currently with, say, in the recent years, the explosion of content, say, on TikTok about autism or ADHD, that these ideas of a particular way of being can have what he calls looping effects, where they impact people, they shape people's subjective experience, and feed back into the very things that we're studying as researchers, the constructs that we're aiming to investigate. Another advantage of media is that it is often naturalistic. It's real world. It doesn't, it's not a situation that we have artificially constructed in a laboratory, in the basement of a psychology department somewhere. But yet, of course, at the same time, we do know, that it is still constructed within social, historical, and cultural context. I think related to all of this, I love Kurt Lewin's classic formula for behavior, that B equals the function of P and E, which is behavior is the function of the person in their environment. And as we are all aware, with half of us on Zoom right now, media is more and more and more the environment that we are all within. Oh, and I forgot, it's unintrusive and usually pretty expedient. Anyone who's ever tried to organize a focus group knows analyzing media is child's play compared to that, right? Trying to organize schedules, get 10 people together in a room, it can be more efficient. So that's another reason that maybe we should look at media. So I like to break down the difference between gathering and analyzing data when I'm thinking about research. So granted, there is a relationship between those two aspects of the research process. As Dr. Fisher-Smith spoke about, we certain particular, epistemological perspectives say particular things about data, and our choice of a philosophical framework is going to inform the way that we gather and we analyze data. But I think even though it is kind of an artificial distinction, just to teach about it, I do like to break up the process of gathering versus analyzing data. And some approaches, say like qualitative content analysis or certain varieties of thematic analysis, might be a bit more flexible theoretically or philosophically. And then some approaches, say like participatory action research or ethnography, don't really fit into this distinction, but I don't have time to go into those today. So with gathering data, you can kind of do very manual. This is, one of my first projects, which I'll speak a little bit more about later. I went to the New York Times website and I put in search terms for the topic I was looking for. And I saved every article by copying and pasting it into a Word document that was related to that topic. In the past, you maybe would have done that by going to the actual paper archives, right, and photocopying. With social media, we can also use forms of automated analysis, which I'll talk a little bit more, but not too much more about in a couple slides. And then there are archival data sets. So I won't go too much into this today, but that would be another perhaps source where you could find media that's sort of already collected. And then once you have whatever data source you're going to use, you can, generally speaking, analyze them using a number of different approaches. For example, thematic analysis, narrative analysis, discourse analysis, interpretive phenomenological analysis, and many more. One of the great things about qualitative is its so-called pluralistic orientation, in my opinion. And I think, generally speaking, your source of what media data to gather, what to look at, should be ultimately, right, based on your research question. As Dr. Shackelford spoke about, deciding between qualitative and quantitative should also be based on, what you're trying to answer. And I think as well, what kind of media you want to gather for your study should be based on the research question. This could include social media, news media. Dan McAdams has done some really beautiful analyses of prototypical American life narratives, looking at people's life stories in autobiographies or memoirs. Dr. Shackelford has looked at film and TV content. There's a lot of different possibilities. And so to speak briefly, because I know this is often what a lot of people want to hear about, is in terms of automated approaches, people often use web scraping, which uses programming language to gather content from websites or from social media. And this is difficult sometimes to present about because it's always a changing landscape. So there's lots of acronyms, GUIs, APIs, etc. A GUI is a graphical user interface that allows you to, like a computer program, click on things and gather data. And that always has often the downside if you don't know exactly what in the black box is going on to gather the specific things. And you usually also have to pay for that. An API is what allows you to access a lot of social media websites, and those are often the terms of those are changing. So I don't really go into ethics in this presentation, but one of the aspects of ethics that needs to be considered, or you could consider, is legality. So, for example, a lot of studies from researchers in the recent past looked at Twitter before you-know-who bought it and changed the name, and also changed the ability of researchers to access it. So now that API is much more restricted, and a lot of people moved to Reddit. And then I heard just last week from a colleague that their account was restricted after they did a bunch of scraping that they had programmed on Reddit. So there's sort of an ever-changing landscape. If you want to get into it more, I have a few resources at the end, and we can speak later as well. So I wanted to briefly mention a few examples of what this all could kind of look like. So one,
Got about 1 minute left, Patrick. So sorry, you're
perfect.
and you're
No,
getting
that's perfect.
squeezed more.
Okay, so I already talked about, I did a study of newspaper articles. We did a thematic analysis. One of our students here at Fielding is looking at newspaper articles in Portugal, doing a discourse analysis. Great. Social media, some colleagues of mine scraped Twitter conversations, in part did a discourse analysis. Great. And Leslie Poston, a Fielding student who's actually here tonight, is doing a really fascinating study where she's looking at TikTok videos where people are using different kinds of communication, substituting words, using emojis to get around algorithmic suppression and censorship. And yeah, since I'm out of time, there we go. Thank you all.
Perfect. So innovative to think about using media data and something that we could definitely be doing in the program, and I'm sure we have. Thank you, Dr. Sweeney, so much, and to all of the presenters. Let me take one question in the room and go ahead and shout it out, and I will repeat it in the mic for those on Zoom. Does anybody have a question? Or yes, Arnella.
Whether the recording will be shared.
Yes, it will. I mentioned that at the beginning. I was
Okay, great.
to everyone.
Thank you.
Arnella in the room has a question.
Research. The community or the participants are involved from the very beginning, and she talked about that creative justice project. I'm a little bit curious just because as I think about research, often the first bit is kind of, oh, I have an idea, and you kind of go from there. She talks about from the beginning to end, participants are involved. So I'm just so curious about like, how does that start? Because like you have an idea and then how does it go from there? Because I'm kind of just like, you get the community and you just say, I'd like to research this. Do you want to participate? Because then I'm just like, well, then are they actually at the beginning?
Well, yeah, actually with PAR, I can say, they would be involved in the development of the research questions altogether, ideally. But Dr. Rivera, do you want to comment on involving the participants in PAR from the very beginning, what that might look like?
Yeah, thank you. I recommend, if you're interested in improving or changing or transforming something, to be in community with people around whatever that issue is or those issues are, and in community have sort of informal conversations first to see what is organically and naturally emerging as something that feels significant and important to people. And then that is how a research question or some kind of collective inquiry is born. So build relationships, be in community, have lots of rich, robust conversations with people about what's meaningful to them, where their pain points are, what their vision is for how they want to evolve an issue or their community or the world. And it could be that lofty. And then what happens is you have these big, beautiful conversations, and then you start to get narrow and deep so that you can create roots that have a research question and have some kind of tailored, actionable research question. And then everything sort of evolves, like all my colleagues have said, everything evolves from there. But as many voices in conversation and relationship, grounded, meaningful around issues that people are hopeful can transform. I hope that's helpful.
And I think that I think Dr. Rivera really drove home that there are principles of PAR that really add good methodological rigor to all kinds of different qualitative projects and methodologies you might be using. As we saw, reflexive got added to thematic analysis because that's really where qualitative research is going. It's 8 o'clock, and I know it's not only late for the West Coast, it's really late for the East Coast. So I'm going to release everyone. I'm a clinician. I like to start on time and on time. For students, please get in touch with me if you haven't established what you're going to do for the final assignment yet. And remember that that is due July 31st, 2 weeks from today. Thank you so much, everyone. I think this was a really exciting group of talks, and I'm very grateful to the faculty and students for squeezing this in the evening. Have a great night.
Thanks,
You want to
everyone.
continue the conversation?
Bye.
You've got everyone's emails. I'll share that with the slides and once again, the articles from faculty. Thanks again to the panel.